Good morning from New York City. I'm Justin Smith, the co-founder and CEO of Semafor, and I'm honored and thrilled to welcome Mathias Döpfner to Semafor's media platform for a conversation about Mathias's new book with Semafor's founding editor-at-large, Steve Clemons. Most, if not all of you, will be familiar with the remarkable arc of Mathias's rise in media, his myriad accomplishments and contributions to global journalism. He really is one of our industry's most influential publishers, as well as thinkers, as CEO of Germany's leading global news organization, Axel Springer. He's done it all: star journalist, leading editorial mind, trailblazing editor-in-chief, founder of Politico Europe, and most recently, owner and leader of America's most successful disruptive news brand, not Semafor, but Politico in this case. And of course, oversees a whole portfolio of globally consequential media properties and businesses. For those of us who live and toil in the trenches of global journalism, Mathias is a true inspiration. He sees our industry, as we do at Semafor, at the cusp of a new golden era fueled by quality independent content, the broad adoption of subscription models, the resurgence of first-party data advertising, and all of this against the background of the decline of social platforms and their corrosive force within our global news ecosystem. Semafor's strong start can be in part credited to the force of Mathias's vision and ambition for independent news ventures and founders. He was one of the first industry leaders to call Ben Smith and me early on to encourage us and see how he could help. So thank you, Mathias. For these reasons and more, we feel immense privilege in hosting today's discussion. Thanks, Mathias, and thank you to my Semafor colleague, Steve Clemons, who himself is also a great force in American and global journalism, especially in the exciting field of live journalism. Over to you, Steve.
Thank you very much, Justin, and Mathias. It's great to be with you to discuss your new book, The Trade Trap: How to Stop Doing Business with Dictators. Now, I want to set the stage with our audience. Mathias and I were at a kind of iconic luncheon party at Tammy Haddad's home during White House Correspondents' Weekend. It's a famous event. Many of you were watching around the world. And there are not a lot of intellectual discussions happening at this gathering. But nonetheless, in the middle of it all, Mathias and I began discussing the power of trade and the tension between ideals and interests that countries have. I think it's very important to mention that Henry Kissinger just died recently, living to 100 years old. And he was the champion of the interests side of the foreign policy and national security school. But their other side of it is in the values side, the notion about what we're about as countries, as democracies, and how best to reify and pursue that. And so in the middle of this, we had this discussion. Mathias and I said, when this book comes out, I want to talk to you about it. So Mathias, thank you so much for joining us. And why don't I just start out and ask you to give the 30-second or longer pitch as you talk to audiences of what you are trying to achieve with this book, The Trade Trap.
Great. Hi, Steve. Hi, Justin. Hi, everybody. Pleasure to be here with you. The answer is very simple. I want you to stimulate a debate. I think we need a debate. And the reason for that is I love democracy and I'm worried about democracy. Democracy is objectively in decline for 17 years in a row. Freedom House has downgraded more and more countries from free to partly free or unfree. And we also see other indicators that autocrats, dictatorships are on the rise, and democracies in decline. And I think there are many reasons, but one of the reasons that is really very much shapeable and in our hands is our trade policy and our business relationships with non-democracies. And here, the Russian war in Ukraine was the final moment when I decided I have to write this book, because we see here one very concrete example how a wrong, opportunistic and short-sighted trade policy, particularly between Germany and Russia, but also between the EU and Russia, has developed a dependency. When Angela Merkel took office, Germany consumed 35% of its gas from Russia. When she left office, it was 65%, which is a clear dependency. And then Nord Stream 2 was the next step to even deepen this dependency. And that has financed and shaped the Putin that we have to deal with. And that is only one example. Another example is what we see in the Middle East these days. Also here we have financed some of these autocracies that are organizing or financing and conceptually developing this genocide and hate and murder and war that is happening. So it is very much against our interests. And the biggest challenge, of course, out there is China. And America is very advanced in thinking that we have to decouple from China. But I think this is one of the big things that America can't do alone. If China decouples unilaterally from China, it will. If America decouples unilaterally from China, it will weaken its own economy and not solve the problem. That's why I thought we have to come up with a concept that is based on a re-established transatlantic alliance and an alliance of all democracies around the globe. And that is not based on prohibitions, like a pure decoupling, but more based on incentives. And that's why I concretely suggest to cease operations of WTO, which is a dysfunctional bureaucracy, establish a new trade alliance of free democratic countries based on 3 criteria, a very basic set of human rights, of rule of law, and an agreement on climate targets. Climate is important. CO2 is important because China contributes 32% of the world's CO2 emissions. And without more kind of pressure on China and more leverage against China, we won't solve the problem. And for these reasons, these countries that can become members of that alliance do tariff-free trade, and countries that are not part of the alliance still can do trade, but then you have to pay tariffs. And I think that such a alliance of democracies is coming late, but not too late. Still roughly 70% of world GDP is in the hands of democracies. So we have the upper hand, but we have to keep it, and we have to strengthen democratic economies, because if we continue to do what we are going to do, the outcome will be terrible. So last sentence, I don't think it's naive to think about a conceptual change now. It is naive to just stick to an old model that doesn't work any longer.
So Mathias, there was a lot there to disentangle, which we'll get to. But when I was reading your book, I've been around long enough to wish this book had been written 25 years ago, before China had become a member of the WTO, before the IT revolution had happened, before Tom Friedman's notion that everyone in the world was trying to become like us, and the information technology revolution would take us there, because it created a global connectivity that I think many people mistakenly thought was a high trust connectivity, that money and ideas and institutions would flow more frictionlessly around the world. But now it seems we have the connectedness, but it's a high fear problem. We're connected to terrorists. We're connected to autocrats. We're connected to a lot of others. So, in a friendly way, aren't you just way too late?
Yeah, I am late. I think the whole discussion is not coming too late. It would have been better. You are absolutely right that if we had done things differently decades ago, but we are in a situation that we are in. And you could also turn it around. And if you talk about the idea about the book, had I written that book 10 years ago, nobody would even think about it, because people were still convinced that this old idea of change through trade is great, and that doing trade, particularly with China, is so beneficial for our economy, which it was for decades. And under Deng Xiaoping, there was a different China and a different approach to really open it up. But when China became a member of the WTO in 2001, it contributed not even 4% to world GDP. Today, it contributes more than 18% to world GDP. America declined in the same period of time from 32% to 24%, and China became the second largest economy in the world, based on the status of a developing country, which is a joke. It's totally asymmetric to allow China, being the second biggest economy in the world, to enjoy all these privileges and exceptions that a developing country enjoys. So that is asymmetry. And unfortunately, this asymmetry, which is the opposite of reciprocity, of what we really should have, fairness and level playing field.
Let me just interrupt here. Do you blame China for that, or do you blame the developed world that allowed it to happen?
I don't blame China, and I don't even blame business people who are doing trade with China, because they just do what they can do.
Right.
I blame more, honestly, politicians that here and there was a mix of naivety and opportunism.
You know, one of the other things I really love when you get in the beginning of your love affair with democracy, and you're very honest that we make mistakes, we have debates, sometimes we do things stupid. Let's talk about not the external enemies of democracy for a moment. Let's talk about the internal dimensions of democracy, just kind of screwing up. I mean, you give a scathing treatment of Angela Merkel and the decision about foregoing nuclear power plants and creating a strategic dependency, essentially on others to provide its energy. You talk about Donald Trump, and it reminds me of Madeleine Albright, who said, Steve, remember, and she wrote a book about this, but she said, Steve, remember, fascism is usually elected. So I'm interested in your reverence for democracies when in fact democracies often have in the past done idiotic things that undermine themselves.
The problem is that too many people take democracy, freedom, and a rules-based and freedom-oriented lifestyle for granted. They think that is like a rule of nature. It's there, it's going to be around forever. And that is wrong. Freedom is very shy, and it's very easy to shy freedom away. And the second aspect is that democracies tend to develop complacency. They think we are doing so great, we are so superior to all these other systems, we are going to prevail and going to prosper forever. And that is wrong. I mean, it has been proven wrong. Just look to the numbers of growth in democracies compared to growth in non-democracies. Look to the kind of political power developments and how a BRIC alliance is forming almost conceptually anti-democratic alternative. To clarify, important thing, if I'm talking about BRIC,
that's Brazil and India.
I think India, for example, needs to be part of that democratic alliance, definitely. Right. But you see, there are a lot of developments simply based on these two things, complacency and naivety.
But do you think the BRICS alliance, just real quick, is, you know, I think from my own discussions with BRICS leaders, that they see a kind of hubris in the West, in the transatlantic relationship, constantly sanctioning them, constantly kind of using the leverage it's developed in ways to punish or cajole them, and feeling, you know, particularly in the case of India and sometimes in the case of Brazil, as if the modern era has been of one of the United States humiliating them. Now, I think Brazil would constitute a democracy still. I think India, though some would disagree with me, probably still as well. And I think you classify it there. But I guess, what if you have tensions between democracies on other grounds, and these democracies just don't want to flock together like you're promoting?
So first of all, we really have to distinguish if we talk about BRIC, for me, it's a big, big difference between China and Russia on the one hand, and between Brazil and India on the other. You have got a lot of good reasons to see weaknesses in Brazil and in India with regard to democracy, and there's corruption and there are other terrible things, and even partly media are influenced, close to censorship, all true. Nevertheless, they are democracies, not perfect democracies, but they are democracies, and that's a big difference. And that's why they should be part of the alliance. Now, in general, yes, there is this tendency, and that comes with complacency, to look down and to other countries and systems. And what we need, and this is exactly the approach of my book, we need, first of all, a concept that creates incentives for everybody to join, and we need to reach out. We need to embrace countries and potential partners and not isolate ourselves. And by the way, last sentence, it is also an important aspect here, that with this concept, I want to foster and strengthen globalization, and I want to avoid deglobalization, which I find particularly dangerous. We cannot solve our problems on national levels, and unilateral policies and anything first or any country only is not going to solve it.
You know, I want to note for our audience today, respect for our friend Evan Gershkovich of the Wall Street Journal, who's still in prison in Russia, 251 days. It was a 250th day anniversary yesterday. You start your book with a kind of chilling remembrance of someone who worked for you in bureau chief, I think, of Forbes Russia, who was murdered, shot 9 times and killed. Then had a discussion with Vladimir Putin following that on whether Axel Springer would stay in the country and operate or not. And I'm interested in these media encounters with political bosses. And so often you tell the story of how you made the decision to stand by editorial independence in the face of the pressures you were under. But I'd love you to share a little bit of these human stories of you went through. I want to do it noting for the moment that Evan is in prison, accused of spying in Russia, and what the playbook is there. Should we just simply put a wall up with these autocracies? You talk about your people going into Iran as a tourist, being thrown in jail, etc. I mean, when you kind of look at the broad side, do you want to simply put up a wall so that we have no longer that kind of engagement or press observance of autocracies?
So many aspects in that question. So first of all, to distribute content of free and independent media is always desirable. So one should distribute the content as long as it is not censored and as long as it is allowed. So we would do that anywhere, and I would encourage any other publisher to do so, because that weakens autocracies in the end. Now these encounters that you were referring to, yeah, they are in a way, they have shaped also my mindset. It is so interesting that running this company and this highly sensitive business where freedom of expression is a cornerstone and you cannot do it without it, the experiences that I collected shaped my view and made me perhaps a bit more sensitive also for the topic. And whether it's Vladimir Putin and the ruthlessness of the behavior that we experienced in Russia, or whether it's Erdogan in Turkey, or whether you have two correspondents for almost a year in a prison in Iran, all these things are basically concrete examples. And sometimes it really is a bit like we feel like canary birds, you know. Canary birds in the mines, they are used because if in a mine there is not enough oxygen, canary birds are dying first. So here it is a bit like dealing with non-democracies and the price that you have to pay in the long run with regard to economic dependency and the political consequences. Media people, journalists may just be like canary birds. We end in prison earlier, but others will do so too.
What about other forms of social media? And I want to be cautious here, but right now there's a lot of debate in the United States about social media platforms, their power, their social responsibility. What social contract should we expect from owners? You encouraged in a tweet, I think, Elon Musk to buy Twitter. Love to know, do you think Elon Musk is being a responsible, stakeholder in democracy? Tweeted out some, because I'm interested in the signals, right? There's a lot of, whistle calls that we hear from, you talk about Donald Trump, but whether it's anti-Semitic whistle calls out there in this time of toxicity, rising populism, what do you think of Elon Musk and social media ownership, and what should be our social contract inside our own democracies?
So in all fairness, when I suggested that, I said also a second sentence, and that was, and we could run it for you, which means somebody with experience in media may be a good addition to the set. I think in general, the real issue that worries me most is the idea of alternative facts. If each bubble in a polarized society particularly has its own facts and is not acknowledging factuality or common ground of facts, then I think a basis for democracy, the fundament also for democratic decisions, for decisions to vote for this or that party, that all falls apart. And I think democracy will fall apart in the long run. And this uncertainty, what is actually true and what is a fact and what is just propaganda or is a misleading rumor, this uncertainty is to a large degree amplified by social media, where this distinction, whether it's a news that is the result of serious and kind of open-ended research and investigation, you still can fail also as a journalist. You do do it very often, but at least you try to find the truth and you did that serious work, or whether it is just a rumor or is just a kind of misleading propaganda information or a lie. This uncertainty is in the context of social media very high. People don't even distinguish that. It is also a lack of education. So I think it is altogether a big societal problem, and we have seen it. And just a very kind of shocking example in the very recent past is TikTok, which plays a very dangerous role in the Middle East war, where perpetrators and victims are completely turned upside down. And just one figure, in the first 3 weeks of the war, there were 17,000 pro-Israeli hashtags on TikTok. Right. At the same time, there were 211,000 pro-Palestinian or pro-Hamas hashtags. That is a huge propaganda machine and has a big impact on opinion forming. So yeah, it is a very serious topic.
I mean, much of what you just said, Matthias, could be applied to Twitter and X as well as to TikTok, maybe other social media platforms. You know, should they be looked at as utilities and taken over? I mean, should there be, I mean, you know, you really slam Kellyanne Conway and say the roots of political violence are rooted in this alternative facts frame. You identify her and look at that, but it's very hard to see that not applying right now to what I've interviewed Elon Musk before, but Elon Musk and Twitter, in addition to TikTok. Should we shut these places down?
Well, and a utility should be treated as a utility if it is really a utility, and if there's no competition. Right. I don't see that in the world of social media. I think here the problem, I see it, for example, with Google. Google is a utility, but I think the bigger problem here is that we have also to distinguish between the shareholdership and where the voting rights are, and the voting rights for TikTok are very clearly in the hands of a Chinese company, and Chinese companies have legal obligations to hand over their data to the government, and the government in China is not an imperfect democracy. It's a totalitarian regime where people get killed because they share different views. So that, I think, is a structural reason, and that leads us again to this trade trap. If we put that on the same level and say, well, actually, we have our own problems in America with certain platforms or even utilities, but we treat that on an equal level with a platform that is in the hands of a totalitarian government, then I think we are making a mistake.
You know, I was very interested in the reflections of your father and an earlier era in Germany. And, you know, my sense, you know, I lived in Japan for high school and others, is the United States and its allies flattened Germany, flattened Japan, brought them back as friends, rebuilt their economies, extinguished hateful ideologies, and hopefully injected, liberalism as a primary moving spirit in these countries. Now, that's oversimplified, but it seems to me that what you're saying in your book, and particularly in your comments with about Donald Trump and others, is you smell that 1930s stuff again, that you worry that the deterioration of democracy, the rise of strong men, and they're mostly strong men, you know, in this is reminding you of a different era. Can you share a bit more on that?
When I wrote that book, I was worried about certain developments, and I just had the feeling I got to write that, I got to express that, otherwise I couldn't look into the mirror any longer. I was worried. Had you asked me the question after I finished the manuscript a few months ago, I would have said, no, what I see, what I smell is not comparable to the 30s, to the rise of fascism and Hitler in Germany. This is a different situation. If you're asking me the question today, after I see what I have to see in the Middle East and in Germany, in Europe, in America, I fear that we are very close to it. I just saw a movie about Joseph Goebbels and how his propaganda machine worked. If I look to the smartness, how some of the sources that try to distribute propaganda in order to make people forget about the attacks on the 7th of October and portray this whole conflict just as a war that is basically initiated or a genocidal action that is done by Israel, then that reminds me very much of the 30s. It reminds me very much also about the efficiency of propaganda, the ruthlessness of propaganda, and how easy it is to just pull people behind that line. I mean, we all know this Harvard study that 51% of young Americans between 18 and 24 think that the Hamas attack was justified. I mean, I just couldn't believe it when I saw that. And so, yeah, I think we have to be very careful. We are not.
I see it. We may see it differently, but I think the ruthlessness of Hamas in this case shocked a lot of people. And in terrorism, which we, of course, suffered through 9/11, Germany, of course, has suffered its own forms of terrorist incidents. My view is terrorists are always taking what actions for whatever they may be for power, but they're trying to look legitimate in the eyes of someone who's aggrieved. And in this, and what I've been interested in is, Axel Springer has a famous, very close relationship with Israel interests. And how do you manage to promote a discussion that I think is legitimate about Israel's short-term security needs and its long-term security needs?
Yeah.
Have a discussion about October 7th. I mean, I'm interested in where was the discussion on October 6th about the subterranean questions about, people there. And it kind of gets into this question of democracy. Depends on which side of the line you are, right? If you are, in some part of Israel or the occupied territories, it doesn't feel like a democracy. A lot of people are trying to promote a Jewish state that's a democratic state, and they see that eroding. So when you look at your own democratic principles, how do you answer that? And how do you give permission for a constructive conversation on that?
So first of all, just to give a bit of context, this kind of relationship with Israel, as you described it, is based on publishing essentials that we disclose in full transparency in order to basically share our constitutional values. It has never any party political implication or people political implication. It is just transparency about it. And that the right of existence of Israel is part of that constitution has to be explained also in the context of Axel Springer founded this company after the Second World War. It is a company that was founded in Germany, and Germany organized and committed the worst war crimes of all times by the genocide of 6 million Jews. So that just explains why we mentioned that, which means we are for the right of existence of all other
totally
countries.
Accept that. I mean, I'm pro-Israel and I support the right of Israel to exist, etc., like most Americans obviously do. But it doesn't mean we can't criticize Israel, right? So
no. On the contrary. First of all, we accept the right of existence of any other legitimate nation and country, but we just don't have to mention it. And secondly, with every essential that we have, that always means, so we also support the transatlantic alliance with the United States of America, but that means that we have to, and do so, to criticize this or that American government or president or person. Only criticism, my mother used to say, the ultimate form of love is criticism. So we also criticize the settlement policies of Israel. We advocate, or a lot of journalists in our company, that's how we should put it. It's not the we opinion. It's not a Axel Springer opinion. A couple of thousand journalists have their views, but a lot of them are in favor of a two-state solution. So am I. So there is a lively debate. But that should not kind of put a terror attack on an equal moral level with a defense action.
No, I understand. But I think it gets interesting in the problem. And I say this as someone who 25 years ago would have been very easily seduced by your book. And I'm just sort of revealing the practical sides of an alliance and a new social contract among liberal democracies in trade. And I assume you would include finance and other big economic instruments in that as well, is that if you imagine a world where someone like Donald Trump, doesn't have to be Trump and others, was deploying the military against its citizens in cities, was jailing enemies or harassing them, that the notion in question about American democracy might be up for grabs, right? That might be much more fragile. And you talk about the fragility. Or you can imagine a situation. I interviewed John Bolton the other day, the former national security advisor to President Trump, who's advocating relocation of all Gazan population. He says it'll be more humane, put them in an economy that works. I said, isn't that ethnic cleansing? And, some would call a war crime. So I think it gets down to this question is, are there behaviors that keep current incumbent democracies in the club, and do they risk being expelled from the club in the Mathias Döpfner plan?
So the plan and the concept is in principle inviting every country, even China and Russia and Iran could one day become a member if the incentives that are set by the critical mass of members and the growth promise comes with it is so attractive that they just comply to the criteria. So nobody is excluded, but that goes also in the other direction. If a country that is considered to be a perfect democracy today is through constant misbehavior discrediting and destroying its rule of law, we have seen tendencies in certain countries over the last years. But if that really comes to a point where the rule of law is questionable or is destroyed, or other criteria are not met, then of course this would have to be monitored very closely and objectively by an independent body. And if somebody
recommend Freedom House,
you cannot continue. Absolutely.
Yeah. Freedom House, my friend Michael Abramowitz is president of it. I think he'd be thrilled. I hope he's online watching this right now. But in that case, Michael Abramowitz's and Freedom House's own rankings of journalistic freedom and freedom of expression in the United States have taken real hits. The criticism in Freedom House reports of the US are pretty significant.
I said it in the book. You see, that democracy is threatened not only by the totalitarian and authoritarian forces. It is also threatened by weak leadership from within, or by populist and demagogic leadership from within. And let's be realistic. Let's look at the big picture. I think the big picture is to discredit and destroy the United States as the leading, towering democracy and democratic economy in the world. That's the big game. And that game is very much in the interest of, you could say, all non-democratic bad actors, but particularly in the interest of the second biggest economy that has clearly and outspoken and transparently explained ambitions to be the leading economy and the leading power in the world. So that's the big game. And I think we also have to understand realistically the consequences that come with it. And we should not just sit there and naively accept it. We should say, as long as it is not lost, let's try everything to avoid it. And that means clear set of rules and criteria. This is one proposal. But of course, it means also strong and great leadership in democracies. And I don't want to comment on any domestic policy issues in the United States. A publisher should be very
go for that.
Particularly a German publisher should be very reluctant in America. But I think you hear what I mean.
Well, take on Germany. I forget exactly the framing, but I really liked it. You said what German leadership is good at is pretending to take risks without taking risks at all, something along those lines. It was a great framing. You might share that with us. But the implication of what you were saying is that Germany is largely derelict in its responsibilities when it comes to the cause of liberalism around the world.
You mean, could you, I'm not sure whether I understood the question perfectly.
Well, I'm just interested in your critique of Germany today, as you kind of write about in your book, and you kind of say, hey, Germany's out there often taking fake risks, that aren't risks at all. And the anguish there, and then just not extending itself in a way. And I just sort of sensed, a pretty strong critique of Germany's absence in this set of issues.
Yeah. Oh, there are many layers, but let me just give you some. One is important, and it can only be understood in the context of history. Germany is a strong economy, but Germany doesn't want to show leadership because leadership is a discredited virtue during the Third Reich and what the Nazis did and what the Führer, the leader, Adolf Hitler did. Even the term leadership, you could not use that in German. You could not say, I want to lead this company, or I want to be a good leader. I want to be a good Führer. No, you cannot say that. So psychologically, the whole idea of leading, being excellent, being outstanding is slightly discredited. And that is deeply rooted in the genetic code of post-war Germans. And that explains a lot of things that happened since then. Germany is still such a terrific country with incredible potential and so many smart people and inventions and patents and everything. And nevertheless, if you look to our growth, if you look to about real value creation in Germany, if you look to the level of bureaucracy and over-regulation that is blocking innovation, then we are acting way below our possibilities at the moment. And this I find particularly sad. And if we look to the very recent past with this unreasonable dropout of nuclear energy and the unnecessary dependency that we have created with that, and of course, also the negative implications on our climate goals, which are unrealistic to be achieved. If you look to the poor performance of the German economy in general, and the recent decisions in the German government, which were even questioned by the Supreme Court, that's all a bit sad at the moment. And since I'm a structural optimist, deeply intrinsically optimistic, I think sometimes it needs to get worse before it gets better. And I still hope that it will get better soon.
Do you know, I was just thinking about newspapers and media organizations, and Axel Springer is just huge. And of course, you own Politico and perhaps other properties in the US. But your comments about not just autocracies, but non-democracies. And there are many non-democracies in the world that we're allied with that are helping us do things around the world. The UAE, Qatar, others. There's this sort of relationships of necessity. But when it comes to the institutions of preserving objective discourse, reporting, and journalism, do you have a worry? I mean, Jeff Zucker right now heads Redbird IMI, former head of CNN, but the fund is a big fund, funded by the UAE. If they were to come along and offer you 5 times what you paid Politico, would you think that would be an appropriate sale? Should they be able to do that? They've just been apparently shut down or told no on the Telegraph. But should there be a worry about big funds sponsored by sovereign wealth funds of democratic governments?
2 questions. Would you do that? No. Is there a serious danger? Yes. I think the danger.
Would you not do it because you want more, or because of the principle?
No, sorry. I meant there is a concrete danger that these players that have not a value set of free and open societies, that they as owners in general, and particularly as media owners, can play a very unhealthy role. I think it is a very concrete danger. And at the beginning, it starts nice with a smile and with ultimate freedom and invitation to invest heavily. Money is not a scarcity. It sounds all great. It's very seductive. But I think that the price we would pay if that becomes in the long run a normal element of media ownership, I think would be very high. So we have 2 principles at Axel Springer. One is that we do not do business in non-democracies. That means that we do not invest or do a joint venture or build a company in a country where the rule of law and freedom of expression and freedom of media do not apply. And we also have a second rule, and that is that shares of Axel Springer cannot be sold to countries that do not comply to these standards. And both is in order to protect our integrity. Again, if I'm saying that we are not perfect and we are not doing everything right, that's very clear. And you may even find here and there little inconsequent elements, but as a general rule, we are very strict about it.
So the British would be correct in your view of blocking this acquisition of the Telegraph and the Spectator?
Since we were wrongly portrayed as being also a bidder in that process, which we never was, we never were, we didn't even sign an NDA. However, I should be perhaps a bit more reluctant in commenting concretely on that transaction. And in general, I think it would not be fair to comment in general, to comment too specifically about it, who should buy it or whatever. I don't care and I don't mind. The only limitation is, and this we have discussed, I think it should be an owner with a democratic background. to hand over a big media asset into the hands of a non-democracy, I think that's a taboo-breaking event. Absolutely.
You know, one of the other things I find intriguing, Matthias, about your concept of pushing a reset in the social contract around democracies and trade, and I think you call it the Freedom Trade Alliance. You know, I have been for years worried that the future of the global middle class is not in Europe and the United States. We're going to do okay, we're going to be wealthy, but the net add to the rising global middle class is not in the transatlantic relationship. It's in places like Southeast Asia, it's in Africa, it's in other places. And that's why if you actually look at the footprint of China's Belt and Road Initiative, it's disconcerting on other levels other than the fact that it's creating efficiencies and opportunities for China. It's where that rising global middle class is likely to be. And I'm interested in competing with that, and whether you think, you know, we're too late, you know, as a freedom trade alliance. I mean, does that just slowly sink in terms of net, net economic growth in the world, and we feel good with our values, but we're less and less of a footprint in the world? Or do we need to do things in the rest of the world? How would you deal with that?
Well, first of all, I'm a free trader. That's very important. I love free trade. I think it's still the best idea. I'm an Adam Smith admirer. And I just think the way
that we with French farmers and American farmers and German farmers.
Yeah, that's a special issue. But the way that we are currently doing it, I think Adam Smith would turn into his grave if he saw that. And I do think it is not too late, because actually it's a good moment. China is not continuing its kind of linear growth path at the moment. There is a moment of weakness. Let's use that moment of weakness, and let's not forget about our strengths. If we really unite big democratic economies, the United States, the EU, Japan, Brazil, India, and others, Australia and Canada, of course, that's quite a powerful promise. And by the way, the lifestyle in our countries is very nice. Yeah, the free lifestyle is so much more attractive for great young talent. You could even make a case why sooner or later a too homogeneous and too autocratic system like China is going to fail anyway. But I would not take that as an excuse to not do anything now, because it may be simply too late if we wait too long. But the short answer to your question is, yes, we have these growth differences between democracies and non-democracies, but I think we have them because we did a kind of self-damaging, almost masochistic trade policy. And if we change that, I think we have a lot of opportunities, and we can still keep the upper hand and strengthen the free and open society model.
Matthias, I've got some questions that have come in from the audience. I'd like to pose a few of them with you as we're doing this discussion. And we've got one from Devin DeClantis, managing partner of LGA, says, how can leaders of private firms help to counteract or counterbalance the rise of autocrats?
Well, first of all, I'm not blaming any CEO who is running a public company or even a private company that he or she doesn't own alone to do business and take advantage of opportunities. It's actually a pretty hard case to sell that you don't take advantage of these opportunities and damage the interests of your shareholders and your growth perspective. So I think it really needs a political framework which creates clear rules that everybody has to comply with. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult. Nevertheless, and having said that, I think every CEO, being it a private company and to a lesser degree also being it a public company, can make a difference. This old saying of Milton Friedman, another person that I admire deeply, but his sentence, the only purpose of business is business, is, I mean, I know his intentions, and the intentions are right. Don't give kind of sweet talk and be successful. But in the current context, this sentence is wrong. Everything that business does is highly political, and everything that you don't do is also highly political. So here my recommendation would be, people who are running companies are very privileged people. We should give a little bit back of our privileges by being a little more courageous than people who don't have the privileges. So just speak up and make a decision. And I tell you, it feels so much better at the end of the day. If you said no to a great opportunity because you just know it's a very dirty deal and it's based on child labor or whatever, don't do it. It doesn't feel good.
Steve Ackerman, who's the legislative director for Congressman Russ Fulcher, says, and it's interesting because I should tell our audience, you've spent a half hour with Vladimir Putin. Like, you've actually met him and talked to him, but, see how his head works. You wrote about Bill Browder, one of his arch nemeses, in your book. But this question says, how is Russia using increased anti-trade stances and isolationism in Congress to control trade flows and build alternative trade networks, which really what you're talking about with BRICS. But from Russia's perspective, and I just want to be honest, I was at a European dinner 2 nights ago, and a senior US government official said, sanctions against Russia are working. We're going to see a diminished economy. But I got to tell you, if you're sitting in Moscow, I know a lot of people who don't feel diminished and think they've got a plan and have a lot of allies. So I'm just interested in your sense of Russia's view of the world and their ability to work around what essentially the transatlantic relationship is doing.
So first of all, I think sanctions only work if you really implement them extremely consequently and radically. A bit of sanctions is almost counterproductive because what it does, it is not weakening the economy and the wealth of people enough.
Are you saying the US has not done that?
Well, the US did way better than Europe. This is very, very clearly the case. Perhaps not enough, but way better than Europe. However, a bit of sanctions just amplifies the efficiency of domestic propaganda. You can then portray yourself as a victim of an international conspiracy and so on, and that may even help your case. But if sanctions are really implemented very tough and consequently, then they have an impact, and they have it everywhere. That's not the only instrument, but it is definitely one that should not be ruled out. If it is about Russia, people make a mistake to, on the one hand, think we can get rid of Putin tomorrow. That's not going to happen. But the other mistake is also to see Russia as Putin is going to reign it forever. Putin is going to disappear sooner or later. And the big question is, will that then be another Putin, even worse Putin, or will that be a real regime change? And I think we should not rule that possibility out. And it also depends on our behavior. And if there's real regime change in Russia, then Russia should be, according to Kissinger's old ideas, again, a potential partner of democratic economies and world powers. So it's nothing against Russia or against Russians. It's against a abusive and, in that case, very concretely totalitarian regime.
This is a sensitive question from Wolfgang Portzig. Is the Springer Media Company expects its journalists to sign a commitment to defend the Jewish people and to support Israel in view of the recent media coverage of the Hamas terrorist attack and the rapid increase of anti-Semitism in Germany? Are you in favor of all major media companies expecting the same from its journalists? And I would just ask you to kind of go a step further. In supporting Israel, does it have different dimensions? Like, how do you have the debate? I mean, when I was a think tanker, I had a program on Israel-Palestine, and a lot of people see the two-state solution or two-state approach as very much in Israel's interest. I have to tell you, a lot of people don't see it that way at all, see it as a anti-Israel position. How do you responsibly manage that conversation?
Two aspects here. First of all, yes, I think it would be a great idea if all media companies would disclose very openly the fundamental values that they stand for, and that they wouldn't pretend to be neutral, because a neutral media company is a lie already. There is no neutrality. Media journalism is done by human beings, so there is no neutrality. Be transparent about our values. And yes, I think the right of existence of Israel, given the very special history of Israel and given the Holocaust, is also a good idea. It's funny that the fiercest opponent of Axel Springer in Germany, a Green politician, Jürgen Trittin, just a few days ago said publicly, every media company should have this principle and should stand for it. So there are surprising alliances here, and I appreciate that very much, that there are some things going beyond party politics. But let me add another aspect here. Of course, the discussion needs to be as diverse, controversial as possible, and everything should be said. And particularly, of course, Israel should be criticized for very good reasons in many contexts, but we should not mix things up and we should not put things on equal levels. I'm still very much under the emotional impression of an interview that was done on CNN very much at the beginning, right after the war started, where a father who was just informed 2 hours before the interview happened that his daughter was killed during that music festival was asked by a CNN reporter about his emotions and so on. And then the reporter mentioned the word peace. And she said, oh, probably I cannot mention the word peace now in front of you. And he said, yes, absolutely, you should do though, because we need peace and we need to come to terms with our neighbors. And although it feels terrible, we cannot let hate rule. I was moved to tears when I listened to this father who just lost his daughter and still had this idea of reconciliation and peace in his mind, while at the same time people are saying, well, basically only a few Hamas terrorists are doing these terrible things and nobody else has empathy for that. And we see the images where a lot of civilians are not only not protesting against these terror attacks, but they are even actively spitting on the dead bodies of victims. So I think there is, and we have to acknowledge that there is simply a conceptual difference. That's why I would always be very careful to put that. As with non-democratic and democratic economies, I would not put a totalitarian aggressor on the same moral level with a not perfect democratic defender.
Mathias, are you excited about generative AI and how you can use it in Axel Springer, or are you worried about it and what it might do not only to your company, but to democracies?
The short answer is I'm both excited and worried, but the slightly longer answer is
I'm schizophrenic like everyone else.
I'm way more excited about it. I truly think it has the potential to destroy journalism as we know it if we publishers and journalists are learning now the wrong lessons and are doing the wrong things. But the possibility that it empowers us and makes the exciting part of our business even more exciting and pushes us to focus on the real distinguishing factors of great journalism, which is content quality and is really investigative reporting, going out there, observe reality and describe it in very, very kind of powerful words, and have correspondence and really be where things are happening. Those are the things that we can focus on, while AI is doing all the stuff from translation to editing information that is already out there to photo selection and other things. So many things can be done, can be delegated to AI, and at the same time then reallocate the funds and invest in quality and make journalism more relevant and better. That is the real opportunity. And I can tell you, I don't know if we're going to succeed, but I'm doing everything from early morning on to make sure that we, Axel Springer, are at the forefront of that development.
Well, back to the spirit of your book, because I feel like we're at an inflection point again in the world with AI and what it might bring. It raises the question that as Europe set out executive orders and codes on AI, President Biden set out a 120-page set of executive orders around AI. So these are democracies struggling with AI. And I've always wondered whether ethical AI beats unethical AI. So if you're dealing with AI in non-democratic countries that are not shaped by those same concerns, some would argue with me, well, China is worried about it, but let's just pretend that you've got different environments, different ways that gravity works politically in these countries. Does, in the end, who comes out on top? Does unethical AI get beaten by ethical AI? I don't know.
This is a particularly great question, and also a very important reason why I wrote that book, because I think artificial intelligence and who basically excels in AI and dominates in AI is, and nobody knew that more in the recent past than Henry Kissinger, is the decisive power factor in world order. And that's why we should take that very seriously. And unfortunately, although I'm intrinsically optimistic on that topic, I end on a more pessimistic note, because I concretely think that if we continue to do what we do, AI in the hands of non-democracies has a competitive advantage. And I will tell you why. Because in democracies and in rules-based societies, you have a balance of freed up innovation and AI developments. And at the same time, you have certain ethical limits where you say, we don't want to allow that. We don't want to do that. In a country where the only criteria for regulation is what is to the benefit or to the disadvantage of the central state or the ruling party, of course, you have no ethical limitations, and you have looser standards on many, many levels. And the second aspect that is decisive for AI progress, next to regulatory kind of ruthlessness, let's call it that way, the second aspect is the quantity of data. And if you have a population of 1.4 billion, you have a competitive advantage to 300 million population and the limitations of data usage. So these two factors, I think, make it very likely that if we continue as we do, that China is going to win the race. It doesn't look like at the moment, but let's see in 5 to 10 years. And we have to do everything to avoid it.
So let me ask you finally a question. You know, I'm a fan of Joseph Nye, who wrote the book and conceptualized the notion of soft power. And soft power, you know, he would argue would be, you know, the Chinese watching American movies or American food culture. Same with Western European culture, and the power that's dealt with differently than hard power and hard economics. And I'm just interested in whether or not your formulation may run the risk of actually handicapping the power of soft power in the world, and whether or not, and I want to make sure I'm not getting this wrong, you're basically in your formula just going to charge more economic costs to non-democracies. It's going to be a financial transaction. So you guys can remain autocracies, can jail your people, Xinjiang can be Xinjiang, and it's just going to cost you more to swim in the world that way. And you're not going to get preferences and treatment and free trade around the world with non-democracies. So is it just a transaction there? And what are your thoughts on what your formula does to soft power? Because you're in the soft power business.
Super interesting. So it really depends on the stage of development. If you are talking about North Korea, for example, my model won't work because it's a totally homogeneous, pure play dictatorship where people never had access to Gucci or to Netflix movies or to other pleasures of free and open societies. If we take China or Russia or large parts of the Middle East, it is pretty different in most of the countries because people had access to these products and services, and they have enjoyed prosperity and growth, and they have here and there a growing middle class. So there are more and more people who know the pleasures of the free and open societies and who have something to lose. And that's why I think if we now unite, if we build an alliance based on this incredible incentive, then these non-democracies have to make a decision to give up a bit of unfreedom in order to achieve a great deal more prosperity, stability, and of course happiness of their people, or to simply stick to the old instrument of autocratic systems, and that is fear. And of course, you can undo all these developments by just stopping them and make sure that people are afraid enough if they oppose that they get killed. That works pretty efficiently. It worked in the 30s. It works everywhere where dictatorship rules. But I think that's a difficult decision to make. And I don't give up this hope that if we really build this alliance, and particularly if America reaches out more to Europe, which is a difficult partner, I know, very slow, and we spoke about it, but also if Europe reaches out more to America and then to other democracies, that this case is so powerful that more and more countries will step by step simply say, okay, come on, let's comply, and the deal is attractive. We have happy people who still can use the products and services of the free and open societies.
Has Klaus Schwab at the World Economic Forum invited you to give a major speech on this book, or are they afraid of it?
That's a great question. I got an invitation of Klaus, but not for a speech. So I will, perhaps you make that suggestion.
Maybe they're listening right now. No, it's interesting because
as we said at the beginning,
for a long time, the World Economic Forum, they said it tolerates too many autocracies.
Sorry, say it again. I didn't hear you.
One of the criticisms of the World Economic Forum is that it has stroked and entertained and cozied up to many autocracies.
If that would be the case, it would not refrain me from speaking up there very explicitly. I'm always doing that, and I do that with pleasure wherever I'm invited, because I really, not wherever I'm invited, but in most of the cases, because I really like the debate, and I also like to debate with people who disagree fundamentally with me.
Well, I'm going to be there, so if you want to, on camera now, we can reprise this there. I would love to do this again with you. I love the book. I was fascinated. I want to commend you. It's a brave book. And I want to, it's fascinating to tell our audience that your publishers didn't want you to write this. They said your reputation would be in shatters. You would be the anti-globalist. You would be doing this. And then world events began happening. And they said, hey, remember that crazy idea you had? Please write that treatment in that book, right? Is that largely how it happened?
Well, that's largely how it happened. And it was that in this treatment, I was predicting that if we continue like that, Russia will invade Ukraine and there will be war. And when that happened, I got a call, Matthias, you got to write that book. And that was the moment when I said, no, I'm going to do it. Yeah.
Well, listen, I believe I'm starting a new column in Principles for Semafor called Provocations. This was a wonderful provocation, stimulating debate and discussion, as we should all be doing. So I highly commend people to take a look. It'll stretch your head a little bit, and it will challenge biases. I think we've been caring about how trade works and what it's for. So read The Trade Trap: How to Stop Doing Business with Dictators. Mathias Döpfner, CEO of Axel Springer. My friend, thank you so much for doing this with us today.
Thank you, Steve. It was a real pleasure. I enjoyed it.
Thank you all.